Daring Greatly by Brené Brown is a book that explores the importance of vulnerability in achieving true courage, connection, and success in our lives. It examines the impact of vulnerability on our personal and professional relationships, mental health, and overall sense of self-worth. Brown encourages readers to embrace vulnerability as it is not a weakness but a source of strength that allows us to be authentic, create meaningful connections, and live wholeheartedly. In this video, we will dive deep into the key concepts of Daring Greatly, exploring how vulnerability can transform your life. Whether you're seeking deeper connections with others, greater personal growth, or a more fulfilling life, this book offers valuable insights and practical advice. If you're ready to break free from fear and shame, embrace vulnerability, and step into your true power, then this video is for you. We often think of vulnerability as a weakness. The word itself evokes images of fear, exposure, and risk. We live in a society where we are taught to be tough, to hide our emotions, and to put on a mask to protect ourselves from judgment and failure. But what if vulnerability is not something to fear, but something to embrace? In Daring Greatly, Brené Brown shatters the misconception that vulnerability is synonymous with weakness. Instead, she argues that vulnerability is the birthplace of creativity, innovation, change, and emotional connection. It is only when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable that we can truly experience life to its fullest, forming real connections, living with courage, and embracing the imperfections that make us human. Brown's research in social work, psychology, and personal development has led her to understand that vulnerability is the key to building resilience and achieving success in all aspects of life. By daring greatly, we open ourselves up to growth, deeper relationships, and a sense of purpose. Part 1. Understanding vulnerability. What is vulnerability? Vulnerability, according to Brown, is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. It is the willingness to be open and imperfect, to expose our true selves, without guarantees of success or acceptance. Vulnerability involves stepping outside of our comfort zones, taking risks, and facing the possibility of failure or rejection. Brown highlights how vulnerability is an essential part of our everyday lives. It can show up in personal relationships, work, creative pursuits, and leadership. Whether we are speaking up for what we believe in, sharing our emotions with a loved one, or trying something new, vulnerability is the underlying force that allows us to connect, grow, and thrive. In this section, Brown encourages us to recognize vulnerability as a strength rather than a weakness. It requires courage to expose ourselves emotionally, but it is only by doing so that we can experience real transformation. Motivation is an inappropriate release. The myths of vulnerability. Brown tackles some of the most common myths about vulnerability that keep us from embracing it. One myth is that vulnerability makes us weak. In truth, it requires immense strength to allow ourselves to be vulnerable and face the potential discomfort of emotional exposure. Another myth is that vulnerability leads to being hurt or rejected. Brown explains that while being vulnerable can sometimes expose us to pain or disappointment, it is also the foundation of meaningful connections and trust. By avoiding vulnerability, we risk living in emotional isolation, disconnected from others. Part 2. The dangers of shame and perfectionism. The role of shame in vulnerability. Shame is one of the most powerful emotions that hold us back from embracing vulnerability. It makes us feel unworthy of love, belonging, or acceptance. When we experience shame, we are often tempted to hide our true selves and put on a mask of perfectionism to protect ourselves from judgment. In this section, Brown delves deep into how shame affects our behavior, leading us to avoid vulnerability and close ourselves off from others. She explains that shame thrives in secrecy, silence, and judgment, which is why it is so important to talk about it openly. Brown's research shows that the antidote to shame is empathy. When we share our experiences with others and allow ourselves to be seen and understood, we break the power of shame. This is why vulnerability is so critical. It creates opportunities for empathy, connection, and healing. Perfectionism and the fear of not being enough. Perfectionism is another barrier that prevents us from embracing vulnerability. Perfectionism is the belief that we must be flawless in order to be worthy of love and acceptance. It drives us to present a curated version of ourselves, hiding our imperfections and flaws in an attempt to meet unrealistic standards. Brown explains that perfectionism is not a sign of strength, but a form of self-protection. It comes from a deep fear of failure, rejection, and judgment. However, perfectionism prevents us from experiencing the full range of human emotions, growth, and creativity. It keeps us stuck in a cycle of self-criticism and shame, rather than allowing us to take risks and learn from our mistakes. Brown encourages us to break free from perfectionism by accepting our imperfections and allowing ourselves to be human. It is only when we let go of the need for perfection that we can truly step into our power and vulnerability. Part 3. The importance of connection. Vulnerability as the path to connection. In Daring Greatly, Brown emphasizes that vulnerability is the cornerstone of all meaningful relationships. Whether it's in our personal relationships with family and friends, or professional relationships in the workplace, vulnerability is what creates authentic connections. It's through being vulnerable that we allow others to see us for who we truly are. And it's through that mutual sharing that trust and empathy can flourish. Brown explains that when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we create space for others to do the same. This mutual openness leads to deeper, more meaningful connections, whether in romantic relationships, friendships, or professional collaborations. She notes that the act of being vulnerable also enables us to take risks, fail, and learn from our experiences, which ultimately leads to personal growth. Connection, as Brown puts it, is the antidote to isolation. By embracing vulnerability, we become more open to the love, support, and belonging that we all crave. Building a culture of vulnerability. Brown also explores how vulnerability can transform organizations and communities. When leaders are vulnerable, they model courage and authenticity, creating a culture of openness and trust. In such environments, employees feel safe to share their ideas, take risks, and contribute to the collective growth of the organization. By fostering a culture of vulnerability, we can break down barriers, improve communication, and create spaces where everyone feels valued and heard. Brown encourages leaders to embrace vulnerability in their leadership styles, as it is the key to building strong, resilient teams and organizations. Part 4. Wholehearted living. Living with courage and vulnerability. Living wholeheartedly means embracing life with an open heart and mind, showing up with courage, and being vulnerable in all areas of our lives. It requires letting go of the need for perfection, embracing our flaws and imperfections, and daring to show up as our true selves. Brown explains that living wholeheartedly is about taking risks and allowing ourselves to be seen, even in our moments of uncertainty. It's about daring to love, to create, to lead, and to connect. Wholehearted living requires a deep sense of self-worth and the willingness to be vulnerable, even when it feels uncomfortable or uncertain. The power of gratitude and joy. One of the key components of wholehearted living is practicing gratitude. Brown explains that when we focus on what we are grateful for, we shift our attention from scarcity and fear to abundance and joy. Gratitude helps us appreciate the good things in life, even in difficult times, and creates a sense of fulfillment. Joy, too, is an important part of wholehearted living. Brown writes that we often fear joy as it makes us vulnerable to loss. However, embracing joy fully, without fear, allows us to experience life to the fullest. Vulnerability and joy go hand in hand, as joy requires us to be present, open, and willing to take risks. Inclusion. In Daring Greatly, Brené Brown teaches us that vulnerability is not something to fear, but something to embrace. It is the key to connection, creativity, courage, and personal growth. By daring to be vulnerable, we open ourselves to the beauty and complexity of life, allowing us to build deeper relationships, take meaningful risks, and live with authenticity. Brown's research shows us that vulnerability is the pathway to courage. It is only when we let go of the need for perfection, overcome shame, and embrace our true selves that we can step into our power and lead lives of purpose and connection. If you found this exploration of daring greatly insightful, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into personal development and self-improvement. Like this video if you believe in the power of vulnerability, and share your thoughts in the comments below. How has vulnerability shown up in your life, and how are you daring greatly? Let's continue the conversation and learn from each other's experiences. Thank you for watching, and remember, the world needs more people who are willing to step into their vulnerability and dare greatly.